What does Christmas, donuts, my sanity, and the CVJ Kumo have in common? The number 12. There are 12 days of Christmas, 12 donuts to a box, and about 12 seconds until I lose my mind because I have to review an IEM with 12 different tuning configurations. Hey guys, this is Dave with Audio In. This is the Cvj K or Kai, not sure quite how to pronounce that, Kumo. And like a lot of IEMs that have been coming across my review table lately, it has tuning switches, 4 to be exact. And these 4 switches give you a total of 12 different tuning options. And as excited as I know you are to sit here for 3 hours and listen to me talk about all 12 configurations, for time's sake, I'm only going to talk about 3 of them, although I'm really only going to be focusing on the 2 that worked best for me. But before we do, let's quickly go over what's included in the box. Of course, we have the IEMs and cable. It also comes with a soft carrying pouch, a cleaning tool, lots of tips, and since this is a modular cable, they also include a 3.5, 2.5, and 4.4 millimeter interchangeable termination option. And as for the price, specifications, and design, the Kumo comes in at $199, and it has an 8 balanced armature driver configuration, and as I had mentioned earlier, there are 4 switches located on the rear of the shell that give you 12 different tuning options. The shell itself is made out of CNC machined aluminum, so it feels fairly robust and it should hold up well with daily use. The fit and comfort of the Kumo is pretty good. They're definitely larger than your typical IEM, so they might stick out a bit. However, they didn't feel heavy or even really ever start to get uncomfortable for me at all. But that is something you might want to keep in mind if you have discomfort issues with IEMs that have larger shells. The included cable is really nice for this price point. It's very light, it's soft, very easy to roll up and store, but what's better is, again, this cable is modular, which means you can change the terminations very easily to suit your needs. Now, as for the design, I like the angular V-cut design in the faceplate. I also like the monochromatic color scheme with both the IEMs and cable. And as a whole, I think Cvj did a great job providing both a really nice design and great craftsmanship. Okay, let's move on to the sound. So the 4 different tuning switches actually give you 12 different tuning configurations. But like I said, I'm only gonna talk about 3 because some of them just don't sound very good. There are some that are either way too bass heavy and others that are just too mid and treble forward. And although I'm going to talk about 3 configurations of the 3, there were only 2 that I thought actually sounded pretty good. But just to kind of explain how these switches work and how each switch affects the sound. Basically, switch 1 affects the bass, switch 2 affects the mids, and switch 3 and 4 affect the treble. So if you put switch 1 in the up position, it gives you a bass boost, and that follows for each subsequent switch. But as far as the Kumo's sound signature, no matter what position the switches are in, it's going to have a V-shaped presentation. So recessed mids and elevated bass and treble. But the switches basically give you a bunch of V-shaped variations to choose from. Now, the first mode I want to go over is the stock switch position, which is all 4 switches down. In this position, again, it has a V-shaped signature with just a little forwardness in the upper mids. And this is one of the positions that I like. It's not my favorite, but it is pretty good. My favorite position is position 2, which is switch 1 up and the rest of the switches down. So the only difference between this position and the stock position is this one brings all of the bass levels up, and what that does is brings everything back into balance. So we don't have as much of the mid-range forwardness as you do with all of the switches down. This position, in my opinion, is the most balanced and natural sounding, pretty much out of all of them. But again, this is just my preference. If you like a little more mid-range energy, then the stock position might work better for you. Now, I need to clarify something. In position 2, when I say it's the most natural sounding, I'm just saying that it sounds more natural than the other tuning configurations, and that's it. I'm not saying it sounds as natural as, say, the Performer 5 or the Ume 2, because I still don't think the mids sound as natural as they could. And then the third position that I want to talk about is with switch 1, 2, and 4 up and switch 3 down. This basically takes the stock tuning and boosts the upper mids and treble. And yes, you do have the boosted bass levels as well, but the upper mids and treble are still too forward, knocking it just a little out of balance. And this is my least favorite of the 3, but still, it's the third best tuning mode out of all of them. So those are the 3 best tuning positions out of the 12, in my opinion. But for the next part of the review, I'm only going to be referring to position 1 and 2, since those were the positions I spent the most time testing with. So if we break things down a little further, starting with the bass levels sound the most balanced in position 2 to me. So with switch 1 up, this position will also give you more warmth and mid-bass punch. But position 1, or all switches in the down position, will give you a more neutral and maybe even a slightly cleaner bass presentation. And I mean ever so slight, because there is still definitely some bass bleed, and it's still not a very clean transition out of the mids into the bass. As a matter of fact, that's probably one of my biggest issues with the Kumo. The bass quality just isn't great. And again, I feel like they could have cleaned that mid-range to bass transition up just a little more, which would have given it some much needed low mid clarity. And I will talk about the detail and clarity towards the end. And that's a problem in pretty much every tuning configuration, but it's the least noticeable in its stock switch position, again, with all switches down. And then as you move out of the bass into the mids, we know the lower mids are lacking in detail, but it does clean up as you move up the frequency spectrum. And of course, we talked about the mid forwardness in position 1, which does put vocals and some instruments more front and center, but it's not as balanced as position 2, and the vocals and instruments still have good enough presence and are front and center, again, enough in position 2 for me. Mid-range detail is about the same in both positions, although in position 1, since there is more upper mid-range and treble energy, it can maybe add a little perceived detail, but to be honest, I don't think it's significant enough for me to choose position 1 over 2, because vocals are still just a little too forward for me. And I talked about the bass quality being one of the biggest issues. Well, my second biggest issue is that the upper mids sound a little unnatural, and that is also an issue in both positions 1 and 2. However, it's a little more noticeable in position 1 because of the extra upper mid-range energy. And that's another reason I prefer position 2 over position 1. And then moving into the treble. So this is another area where I think there could have been some improvement. because the treble presentation can come across as a little dark, and I also would have liked just a little more air and sparkle in the upper treble past 10K. And yes, switch number 4 is supposed to give you a treble boost, and it does, but it doesn't seem to affect the upper treble, at least not significantly. It seems like I am hearing more energy below 10K and in the presence region, which does give cymbal strikes a little more prominence, and it also does help to give it a little more of an open and exciting presentation. But another issue for me is, like the mid-range, there's something about the treble that sounds just a little unnatural, even with switch 4 down. And then when you boost those frequencies, it actually makes that characteristic even more noticeable, which is why I just prefer to leave it off. And any upper treble that you may have with the switch down seems to get buried even more by all of the extra energy that is increased below 10K when you turn switch 4 on. Now, as for technical performance, I would say its detail levels are pretty good and acceptable for this price range, but not quite to the levels of the Performer 5, Kara, or Ume 2, because we have some detail loss in the mid-range because of the bass bleed, and also some detail and micro detail loss in the treble and upper treble. The soundstage and imaging is good for this price range, but still falls just below the Performer 5, Kara, and Ume 2. And the reason I keep bringing these 3 up is because I feel these are the top 3 best IEMs in this price range, in the $200 price range that I've listened to. But there are lots of IEMs in this price range that I feel the Kumo does either go toe-to-toe with or even outperform it. So I do think the Kumo is still reasonably priced, and this is a good segue into my conclusion. So just to summarize my thoughts on the Kumo, this may not be the best IEM in the $200 price range, but I do feel like it's the best Cvj IEM that I've ever heard. And I do think that Cvj is moving in the right direction, and it is still competitive with many other $200 IEMs like the OH10S, the Winter Ultra, the GK100, at least in terms of tuning, although the GK100 has pretty insane detail for its price. And as to whether I give the Kumo my recommendation, sure, it's not a strong one, but I do still feel it's a decent IEM. And again, I think Cvj is moving in the right direction. Maybe just lose the switches and focus on a single good tuning, but keep the great cable, design, and build. But overall, I feel it's Cvj's best one. So Cvj, keep them coming. So that concludes my review of the Cvj K Kumo. Thanks so much for taking the time to watch. If you like my content, please take a second and hit that subscribe button. Also, if you would please like this video, please share this video. I hope you have an awesome day.